Established in January 1974, Kerry Cooperative Creameries Limited, or Kerry Co-op, celebrates a special anniversary, 50 years. This podcast series has been created by Mary Lavery Carrig, based on the first board photographed together in January 1974. This is Mary, and you are welcome to A Chat with Mary, Voices from Kerry Co-op's story. In this episode, episode 1, we hear from Eamon Barry. I asked Eamon to recall his father, Mikey Barry, from Causeway, North Kerry, and his association with Kerry Co-op in those early days.
My father was one of the founding board members of Kerry Co-op, and at the time Kerry Co-op was being formed, I would have been around 20 years. I was at home farming with my father. I was one of a family of 2 boys, and I inherited the family farm. So I would have had a great interest in what was going on in Kerry Co-op at the time. How my father was involved in it was he was representing the Ardfett group of creameries. There were 3 North Kerry men involved in the founding board of Kerry Co-op. You had Frank Wall of Tarbert, who represented the Listowel group of dairy disposal board creameries. Eddie Hayes, who represented the Kerry Cream group of creameries, and my father, who represented the Ardfett group of creameries. The Ardfett area consisted of the boundary, the entire Causeway parish, Kilmiley, Ardfett, Ballyhaig, Churchill, Interfeenet, a great vein of land at the time, but it didn't have great milk production because the predominant activity in farming at that time, and there was more money in it, was tillage. And I suppose the 2 things that did happen at the time when Kerry Co-op was formed, and we also joined the corn market. And a combination of the 2 made fantastic changes in dairy, in farming generally, but particularly in dairy farming. Prior to the building of North Kerry milk products, farmers, they took their milk to the creamery, and the only thing that they got paid for was the butterfat content of it. The protein content, it came home in the farm as skim milk, and it was used to feed calves. Pigs were a big industry at the time, and some of it was discarded of at home. There wasn't much mess in it. And then the Dairy Disposal Board were asked in the early 60s to know would it be viable to build a processing plant in Kerry. Survey was done first around 1966, and they said no, it couldn't happen. And later the figures came up proper, and they agreed. So the Dairy Disposal Board, in conjunction with the Federation of Co-ops of North Kerry, between them built North Kerry milk products. The biggest shareholder in it was the Dairy Disposal Board, and all 7 co-ops had an equal share in it. After that, 4 of them joined up together to form Kerry Cream, and later joined Kerry Co-op when it began in 1974. But we had 2 ministers for agriculture at the time, 2 outstanding ministers. We had Jim Gibbons and Mark Clinton, and they were the 2 ministers responsible for disposing of the Dairy Disposal Board interest in Kerry to the farmers. There was a lot of discussion at the time because when the Dairy Disposal Board came into being around between 1927 and 1929, it was the small co-ops who were incapable of paying the farmers, and the government of the day took them over free of charge, and there was a frame of thought out there at the time that they should give them back free of charge. But both ministers were in agreement that that could not be done, as it was state property. And after much negotiating, a price was agreed of 1.15 million for all of the dairy disposal board creameries in Kerry and their share in North Kerry milk products. And that is the real background as to how Kerry Co-op begun. It didn't happen overnight. It was going on for a long time. It made a huge difference to dairy farming, the fact that we were able to dispose of our skim milk, and later with technology, the products that it produces now is what gives us the standard of living we have in dairying. But none of that was there in the 50s, the 60s prior to that. Like how they finished up on the board of Kerry Co-op at the time, they were each representing their own group of creameries. In my father's case, there were 7 branches in Ardfert, and he was chosen to represent the Ardfert interest in the establishment of Kerry Co-op, and also to be beneficial to the building of North Kerry milk products as a farmer representative. Even though it was the Dairy Disposal Board interest he was representing. But when they then decided to buy it, they were given the authority by the farmers in their own area. They had full authority to negotiate with the then minister, and they agreed a price, and they came back, and the money then had to be collected. That was the difficult part in 73, and the famous shares that we call Kerry Co-op shares now, that's when they begun. £1 a share, and if you were in a dairy disposal board area, which was the overwhelming majority of the county, you couldn't just say, I'll give £100 or £20. You had to take out 1 share for every 40 gallons of milk you have. And there are a lot of people of the frame of mind that every milk supplier became a shareholder. That was not the case. In some areas, the take-up was only about 50%, 60, 70% at most in areas. So not every milk supplier became a shareholder. Every milk supplier had the choice to become a shareholder. But what people may not realise, while you say 74, it's a long period away from 1927 and 1929, when all the small co-ops went broke at that time. The state was only being formed at the time, but there were people alive who remembered it. And there was a lot of people who would prefer to stay with the Dairy Disposal Board arrangement at the time, but that wasn't to be. The history speaks for itself regarding who was right or wrong on that. My father passed away in 1984 at the age of 65, but he was a well-known North Kerry farmer prior to that. I suppose what he would be most remembered for was his involvement with Paddy Finucane and Independent Farmers TD. And what Paddy was most famous for, it's been discussed at the moment now, the Brick-and-Cashin drainage. The Brick-and-Cashin drainage embraced nearly all of North Kerry. It affected the lands from within a mile of Ballyhige village right over to Abbeyfield and all of North Kerry. And we hear a lot of talk now at the moment about re-wetting. So he was very involved in that. And then from a very early age, the minute there was farmer representation in the Dairy Disposal Board side of the creameries, he automatically became involved in that. And he did a lot of work with both the 2 main managers in Ardfert that he dealt with would have been John Blackwell, who was originally a Tipperary man, and then John Keller, who was a Clare man. Himself and John Keller became very close. And John Keller then went in with Kerry Co-op. When Kerry Co-op started, all the managers went in, but not all the managers were in favour of the establishment of Kerry Co-op at that time, because, as I did say earlier, you had 7 branches in the Ardfert group, and each branch had its own manager, and change brings suspicion, and a lot of those managers were of the frame of mind that they may lose their job. You had a manager and a man working in the creamery with them, and they felt fearful of their job. So it wasn't smooth sailing. Not alone were there farmers that were a little apprehensive about going into a co-op, but the creamery, the employees, the creamery managers, some of them were not in favour of it either. So that would have affected the thinking of many farmers at that time. Well, it certainly was an exciting time, but the excitement was nothing like what it should be when we now realise what Kerry Co-op has turned into. During that year that they formed Kerry Co-op, that it begun, They first of all had to negotiate, as I said before, the price with the minister. They had to sell it to their fellow neighbours and farmers. My father covered a very big area, as did Frank Wall and Tarbert and all the other dairy disposal board men. They had to go out and sell it, so there was an awful lot of work involved in the sale of it. Some people were suspicious of it, some people didn't take out shares, others did. My father was a very quietly spoken man, but when he wanted to get a point across, he had no problem in doing so. I suppose when I do hear people speak of my father, and I got involved a little bit in politics myself afterwards, they just asked me what was I to Mikey Barry, and he was famous for his church gate speeches. When I used to be around from Tarbert to Tralee, people would quote that Mikey Barry used to speak on behalf of Paddy Finucane outside churches. The church gates were a very big event at the time. Everybody spoke, and that was the main means of communication and communicating your message. So he was very well known, as I understand it, for that. He had a great relationship with Paddy Finucane. He was involved in most of the enterprises that were farming at the time. But at the meeting in Banna Beach Hotel, where the Artfert Group decided that they were going PLC, I had discussed it with my father before he died, and also who died around the same time, quite close to my father, was Frank Wall, and I remember them both speaking of it, and they both spoke very favourably of it. He didn't have great health before he died, and he died suddenly, but we had a great relationship, and that relationship that existed between Kerry Co-op and my father, I think to the best of my ability I carried it on for as long as I was farming. We never realised back in 1974 that Kerry Co-op would turn into Kerry Group, and what it has turned into, it has been very beneficial to Kerry farmers especially, and shareholders. Prior to Kerry Co-op beginning, any of the small co-ops did not pay a dividend, so the number of shares you had were basically irrelevant. But it was one thing that Dennis Brosnan, as chief executive of Kerry Co-op, insisted in doing from the very beginning. He insisted in paying a dividend on the shares, which made it more attractive to actually have shares and take an interest in the shares that you did have. In general, the philosophy of the co-op movement was to reinvest any surplus cash they had back into the business to improve the facilities within the co-op. And it was when Dennis Brosnan became managing director of Kerry Co-op, he insisted in the beginning in paying a dividend on the shares to reward the persons who did put money into the business to get it going. If we look back today on 50 years ago and the style of farming that existed, Ballinascreen, where we went to the creamery, there was always a big line of traffic up and down the road, and 2 and 3 tanks. Now it has all changed. Bulk collection in the farm gates. The number of farmers have without a doubt decreased, but the prosperity in the country, if you drive through it, it's very reflectful of what the combination of Kerry Co-op, Kerry Group and joining the common market has done for us. I'd say the people who formed Kerry Co-op 50 years ago would be very proud of what has been achieved, and I think that there will be even more achieved, but there is great prosperity in the country now, and it's nice to be alive to see it. And if my father, Mikey Barry, were alive, I think he would be very pleased. He always liked to see progress, and I suppose even on the family farm there's progress being made all the time, and I'd say his spirit is still with that farm.
I wish to say a sincere thank you to Eamon Barry, speaking about his late father, Mikey Barry. Thank you too to Charlie Nelligan for concertina music. You have been listening to a podcast series, Episode 1, from A Chat with Mary, Voices from Kerry Co-op's Story. This is Mary Lavery Carrig, and thank you for listening.